Welcome to today's episode of Daily Work Journal. I'm so excited to be here with Bea Kim. She's a life and executive coach and keynote speaker through her own coaching practice, Bea Kim Coaching. I consider Bea a colleague and mentor in the coaching field, as I am also a coach. I met Bea a few years ago in the pandemic. In fact, I've never met Bea in person. We've always been virtual friends. We met through a virtual mastermind group for coaches that one of our mutual friends put together. Very grateful for Lulu. Bea has co-founded several companies, including Parent Refresh, a company that provides parent-focused services through life coaching, fitness, and community, and Awaken, a diversity, equity, and inclusion educational company. Bea is a mom of two and lives in the Bay Area with her husband. I'm so happy to have you on this episode.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks so much, Jess.
Yeah, of course. So I'd love to just get us kick-started with the generalist question, which is how did you get to your career today? You have 3 different companies. You do a lot of coaching, workshops, teaching, speaking. Tell us about that.
Let, let me just make sure that I set the record straight, which is the 2 other companies I'm not involved with anymore. So I co-founded them, and then Parent Refresh, which shuttered, and Awaken is still doing its wonderful thing. But okay. I always find it funny when it's like, how do you do it all? It's like, I know I can't do it all with a lot of help. But how did I get to this career is a really good question. I always struggle with how far back I go. I'll just start with ever since I started my professional career. I started off as a management consulting because I feel like management consulting was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I want to do. So let's just do everything.
I did that. Yeah, like your first
That's
job out
right.
of college.
That's right. First job out of college. And it was one of those things where every 2 years, like clockwork, I would go into this full-on existential crisis. I'm just getting better at this thing that I don't love. And now I'm
Mm.
only going to get hired for this thing that I don't love. And just every year that passed, I would just, again, like clockwork, every 2 years, I just go into this like panic mode. And what I would do to make myself feel better is like feel a sense of control is I would just do a whole bunch of research. What else is out there? Can I go back to school? What other industries are there? What other job functions? And then it would never turn into anything. And I'd be like, okay, I feel better. And I'll just continue doing the thing that I'm doing. But it wasn't until I got my own coach. And she was like, B, no more research.
Love
Just
that.
act, just do something. And by the next time we meet, no more research. You've done something. And I was like, what you do is cool.
Yes.
And so I enrolled into Coaches Training Institute, which is like a program I highly recommend for people who are looking into coaching. And I was terrible. Like the very first like
It was
module,
hard.
I thought it was
Oh,
going to
yeah.
be like lights are going to shine and I'm going to be like, this was my calling all along.
Yeah.
And it was not that experience at all for me. I was like, this is hard. And
Yeah.
I'm trying to coach someone and they're talking to me. And the whole time I'm just thinking, like, what's my next question?
Well,
What's
yes,
my
what I
next
asked
question?
next. Yes.
um, but I stuck with it and then I loved it. And so I've been coaching full time. This is my full-time job. I coach for myself, work with amazing clients, and I've been doing this for over 7 years now.
Wow. Okay, so that time when you hired rather your own coach,
Yeah.
how long did it take for you to work with her to realize that you liked what she was doing?
I always had curiosity. Like even when I went through that research mode, a lot of the research I did was like, should I go back to school to become a master's in social work or do
Mm.
therapy or consulting or counseling or something of that nature? Because
Got it.
it married what I really like to do, which is get engaged deeply into conversations, ask questions, curiosity as a love language, that type of thing. And kind of the confirmation I got from people, which is, hey, you're a good listener, or my cab driver, because I used to for consulting would fly out every week, would end up telling me like their life story in a
Yes.
40-minute drive. It was just something that I was always curious about. But when I got my own coach, I was like, nah, this is something I want to do. This is cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you were in our first CTI class. It's like a 3-day program, first weekend. What made you sign up for the second one? Was it because you're sharing with us that experience it sounded like out of your comfort zone?
Yeah, that first weekend, I was just like, this is hard. But there was something about There's a difference I've noticed within myself, and I see this with my clients all the time, where there's a difference between hard reward and fulfilling hard
Mhm.
work versus like hard drudgery, right? Like it's just right, it's a different feeling. And it was like, I can see this becoming really fulfilling. Like when I saw a light bulb, like figuratively with my practice client or whatever during class, I was like, yeah, that was like a little hit of dopamine that I really appreciated. And I was like, okay, that was hard. It was not the angels and like lights that I envisioned, but I'm ready to sign up for the whole thing. And I did.
Yeah, and I love that distinction between hard awareness and or hard you want to do it some more and hard
Yeah.
drudgery because
Yeah,
that's a good data point to guide us on our next step.
for sure. For sure.
Okay, so you've been doing this for 7 years. We have to talk about the evolution of that. Tell us a little bit more about what was it like when you first started and what it is like now?
So when I first started, I went through this whole, and I see this a lot in terms of anyone starting anything new, coaching, new job, new like parenthood, like anything that you're just starting, kind of managing change. There's a lot of self doubt. There was a lot of, I can't charge anything for this because one, it doesn't feel like work. Sometimes it didn't feel like work, right? I'm like, I just getting listen, like someone's paying me to coach them. But then the second was like constantly the question of, am I providing value? Am I actually providing value? So there was a lot of internal battles in addition to just the external, like starting your own business and having the structure and operations place and like how much do I charge? What are other people
Yes.
charging? Why aren't people more transparent about how much they're charging? Just all of those things. So I went into a yes mode, right? Like I will just coach anyone, everyone. If you are willing to say yes to me, I will try my darndest to coach you. And that was
Wow.
at the beginning. And I was really trying to find who my ideal client was because at that point, everyone had said, you've got to have a niche. You've got to make sure, what your branding is. And I was like, I don't know. And so I just coached everyone, like truly people who were leaders. There are different identities, women of color, LGBTQ community. I mean, just like anyone and everyone. If you were going to say yes to me, I would say yes back to you. And then as I grew into my own, I realized, no, there's a certain type of ideal client that I really love coaching.
Yes.
And so I just started niching more towards more identity based coaching, like Asian women or women of color who are professional working, a lot of them parents. And then like at the 4 year mark, I was like, okay, what else? What else is so there's constant evolutions, right? And so
Yes.
now I was challenged by my own coach because I truly believe great coaches need great coaches. I was challenged by my supervisor coach because I have a life coach and a supervisor coach. And she was like, B, what's your vision for yourself? And I was like, my vision is still part of my internal team. My vision is 99-year-old B. And I see her, she's someone who's unassuming. Maybe she's a little bit hunched over, like hasn't had all the calcium she should have in her life, but she walks into any room and she can coach anyone, like anyone. If
Wow.
she has that deep confidence, I can coach you. And that was the vision I have for myself. I still have that vision for myself. And so my coach said, I challenge you to coach your ideal non-ideal clients because I also had clients that I thought were
Ooh.
like non-ideal clients, like I have nothing to offer this type of client. And that was scary. That was a real big challenge, but I ended up doing that and so much learning, like truly, okay, check my own biases, check realizing that I do have a lot to offer outside of some of these internal narratives that I have. And now my coaching clients have expanded a lot. So I've gone through phases saying yes to everyone, then niching down, and then saying yes to everyone again. And then so
Yeah.
there's these evolutions and waves of from beginning to where I am now.
Wait, so what was it about the 4th year so did you hire your supervisor coach again, or what happened at the 4th year that became the tipping point for that evolution?
Oh, was it 4th year? It was around middle so far in the middle of the journey so far,
Got
but
it.
I was about, I think, I just think, uh, Someone had told a boss of mine when I was at Accenture,
Okay.
when I was 24, 25, I was itching to get ready to leave consulting. I was like, okay, what's next? And he had said something to me, Fred Sean. He told me, he's like, I noticed this that because we've been trained all the way growing up to see things in 4 year periods, right? We go to high school in
Oh
four
my
years,
God.
college in 4 years, that it makes a lot of sense that after being in the professional space where we're like feeling very untethered and not having the strict regimen of school, we're like, okay, around
What's
4 years is
next?
what's next.
Yeah, that's
And
so
so,
funny. Yes.
yeah,
It's
so
like
he saw
something
that
I
a lot.
feel like we know, but then we lose the knowing of. And you telling
Yeah.
me this right now is reminding me that actually I think I know that, but I don't normally have the awareness of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes it's just
Okay.
bringing it to the surface. So I think there was
Exactly.
something there, and I think yeah, so maybe that was a part of it, but even now I just am constantly thinking about how do I want to evolve myself as a coach, as all the different identities and hats that I wear, right? Like how do I want to continue to fulfill that value of growth for me?
Yeah. Okay. So now we're talking about coaching. This is something in my experience, I cannot coach for more than like a couple hours a day. And it's embarrassingly not a lot of time. I want to say I can only have 3 sessions max, which
Hmm.
is not a lot, or maybe it is a lot, depending on what lens you come out of. I'm curious how you find the energy to, first of all, let me back up. What is your routine like? And if you do indeed do a lot of coaching, how do you find that emotional energy to have all these sessions?
Yeah, so it's that's not embarrassing, Jess. Can I just like fully acknowledge and validate for you? Like everyone has their own threshold. It's a muscle too. I feel like it's a practice. So the first time, like after one call, I'd be like, oh, okay, I'm done. Right? Like,
I know.
okay, I'm done. Yeah, these days, the way that my weekly schedule looks like is most of my coaching calls are Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then I leave Fridays for either 360 interviews or business development. And I leave Mondays for a lot of like operational work. So that's my ideal weekly mix.
Got
On
it.
Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I tend to have 5 to 6 calls a day. How do I have the emotional energy,
Just even
physical energy? So for me, there's two things, both the internal and the external. So the external piece is I always buffer, right? I buffer time in between. So I'm not just going back to back. I need some time to decompress. I think there was even a recent, I don't know, article or study that had come out that was, I know, circling around in LinkedIn about like your brain activity and the amount of cortisol or stress that accumulates if you don't have any downtime between meetings.
makes sense.
Um, but so I always make sure I buffer. So just structurally, I have a structure of I'm not doing back to back. I have at least in a minimum 15 minutes in between each session,
Mhm.
if not a little bit longer. So that's one thing that helps me just now start focusing on the next client. In terms of the internal piece, there's two things. One, the clients who I love to coach is I always set expectations right up front. We design our partnership. Every new client I have, we design a partnership.
Right.
And one of the things is like, hey, it's both of our jobs to create a space of growth, transformation, vulnerability, like and learning. So it's not just me trying to hold the space and my muscles are shaking trying to do that. It's truly it's on both of us. And so there's this expectation that both of us are holding it. And frankly, I feel like coaching is just it is a dance, right? It's I
Mhm.
don't feel like I think Michael Bunjay Stanier, who wrote The Coaching Habit, he talks about lazy coaching. Ever since
Yes.
he said that, I love it because it's like, are you working too hard? Are you trying to solve and do
Yes.
consulting for your client? And if you ever
Yes.
feel that way, that's probably a huge energy burn, an energy suck for you.
Yes.
And ever since I read that or heard him say that like years ago, I was just like, yeah, I think it's a disservice to my client where I feel like I'm having to solve them or solve their problem or make sure they have a light bulb moment. Whereas in reality, it's let's just create the space together, dance in it, and see what comes up organically. And so I think the
Yes.
emotional energy is easy when you have amazing clients who we've set expectations like that together right from the get go. Yeah,
What
and
a
that's the most transformational, evoking type of coaching
yes.
too, in my experience.
I agree with that. Okay, then what about when they are challenging? Like that you the Built Alliance is great, but that they're just not as enjoyable. They're just, or whatever.
I do. It feels oftentimes like the image I get in the metaphors, I'm just bumping up against the wall constantly. Like
Yeah,
I ask a
totally.
question. The metaphor too that I've just recently talked about it with my coach, because I do have a couple clients where I show up differently. When I feel like a client is where I feel like I'm bumping up against the wall, the persona that came up for me was like, I feel like I'm a salesperson. Wait, have you tried this one? What about this new? Like, try this one, try the, and it's
Yeah,
exhausting. It's exhausting to be in a
totally.
space like that. And so my my love language to my clients truly is curiosity for them and for me. And I've always found that disclosure is, especially in a coaching space, is always like one of the most powerful tools, right? For me to just be able to say, hey, I'm getting a sense that there isn't any kind of breakthrough here, or you've come to me for coaching, and yet it sounds like you have all the answers already. What are we
That's a
doing
good
here?
one.
So, what can I be of service to you? Because right now I feel like that's not happening. Just naming things can oftentimes shake things up where the clients, oh, I'm I'm not getting that sense, but okay. Or we can talk about like how do we want to redesign this partnership so that, if it's feeling easy for both of us. Because if I'm not feeling at ease, but they are, that's also not ideal. Right.
Right. So, you know how you shared with us the evolutions of your coaching practice? How do you gain different aspects to think about these evolutions besides hiring a coach to help you?
We're on the right podcast, right? Journaling, reflecting, time for reflection and intentional reflection is, I think, incredibly important. There are set periods where I'm like a terrible journaler, by the way. So I've like full disclosure, like people are usually shocked. They're like, you're a coach and you don't journal every day. I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't. I don't, but I do have set periods of time where I do make sure I'm like once a quarter where I'm doing quarterly OKR reviews. I also tend to zoom that up and bring that up to my whole life, right? Because work is only a part of my life. I like to contextually see things holistically. And then I do a weekly cap. So I just a quick 10-minute time block on my calendar on Fridays to say, what's something that went well this week? What's
It's a good
something that
one.
I want to make sure I'm thinking about as I look at next week, and any kind of things I want to celebrate for myself. So
Yes.
there's just very quick, short things. Um, and then I do a daily thing, but it's not journaling in the traditional sense. It's just tally marks for me. That's what has been most helpful is I do a -2 to +2 coding. I think that comes from cognitive behavioral therapy, which is just like, was today a -2? Was today a -1? Was it a 0, which is neutral? So that's usually your ground base,
Yeah.
+1 or +2. And then I just tally mark based off of the values that are important to me: value of community, value
Interesting.
on physical health, value on family, values on growth, those different types of values. I just tally mark. Did I do that? And it gives me a good and small, like maybe 1 or 2 sentences max about what made it that -2 or +2 or 0 day.
Yeah.
And then it just gives me data, right? But it is all very much grounded on values. I did not really answer your question, except did, which is like reflection, right?
Yes.
Making sure you carve out reflection that fits your schedule. Because for me, I don't do morning pages. I don't do miracle mornings and things that other people swear by,
Yes.
but my system works for me.
Okay, so you have these numerical quantities and it sounds, do you analyze it in the day? Is that what you're saying?
At the end of each day.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And how do you take that to inform the next day necessarily, or not really? They're just independently days.
I'm just gathering data on myself. That's one of the things I always encourage my clients to do at the beginning of our relationship is we're at the data gathering stage. Let's gather data on what works, what doesn't work for you, what internal narratives you have, what makes something a really good day, what doesn't. That will inform what you value, right? And for me, the themes I've noticed is, gosh, if I did something around community and I'm feeling deeply connected with my relationships, my larger community. If I do something around growth where I feel like, yeah, either it's a personal growth, whether it's investing in some kind of curriculum or whatever, if I feel like I'm learning and growing, those two constantly will always add to a big positive number for me.
Yeah.
Um, I could do back to back 8 coaching sessions in a day. Will that necessarily mean it means it's a good day? No, not necessarily.
Yeah. It's so interesting. What would you say if somebody asked you, how do you get good at reflections? What would you say?
It's like any habit. It's like any habit is okay. If it's any habit, I like to think about it in what are the components of a habit. And this is top of mind because I also write for my children's parent education portion of their weekly newsletter.
Oh, I didn't know
And so
that.
I just wrote one around build good habits for your kids and for yourself. Anyway, so it's CAR, cue,
Okay.
action, reward. Those are the
Okay.
3 components of building a good habit. So the cue could be anything, but something that either you already do, like you go to the restroom every day, or you're always putting on your tennis shoes when you go out, whatever that cue is, make
Yes.
that, attach that to whatever the action is that you want. So for you, if it might be, you know what, when I brush my teeth at night, does it have to
Yes.
be a full on journaling thing? No. When you brush your teeth at night, that's your cue. The action is just think about what's a highlight of the day, what's a low light of the day. Like it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It could be
Right.
something very incremental.
Yeah.
And then the reward, like BJ Fogg and like James Clear from, they always talk about reward. It could be just a quick, it could be anything to just be like solidifying that habit for you so that you're continuing to do that on a regular basis.
What
Dinner
if it's
table for
like,
us, we do highlight low light with the family. Yeah.
oh my gosh, that's such a great family activity.
Yeah.
Yeah. What if it's somebody just like imagining someone who's not, they're not in tune with like their own awareness almost. Like they're just, it feels as an observer, like some of my friends or whoever, like I'm having this impression of, is they're just like going through life blacked out. And I don't want to force them to do reflection, but I think my intuition is that they would benefit immensely, whether it's journaling or not, right? Like just having some of these downloads about what could they change or what's not working for them. But when you ask them, there's just so little that you get out from that.
I like to think about it as feedback. And
Okay.
whenever I think about feedback, I always like to start off by saying or thinking about what's the purpose of feedback? Like, why do we give feedback? Do we
Okay.
give feedback to people we don't care about? Usually, no. I'm usually not going to go out of my way to give a stranger whom I've never met, who's not causing like actual harm. I'm not going to be like, hey, let me give you some feedback. But I will
Okay.
give feedback to people that I care about or I have some kind of relationship, some form of relationship with. And so I always think about it as feedback is saying, okay, how do you give good feedback? One of the first things you can say is you can start with an observation. Always ask for permission. You
Yes.
never want to just like,
Go with
boom, give the
it.
feedback and have them completely discombobulated, but always ask for permission. Hey, would you be all right if I gave you some feedback or if I could share some observations I have with you, right? Something
Right.
very there. Because if they're not ready, they could say no. You could always say no, but I just had some observations in our last conversations that I'd love to share with you. And then once you get their acceptance, then you can do it more as like the impact to me, right?
Yeah.
I care about you. And it doesn't even have to be like always leading up to say, I really care about you and this is why I'm giving it to you. It could just be like, hey, when this happens, the impact to me is this, right? So it could be simply like that because it, people go on the defensive. It's just natural for someone to say, hey, it seems like you haven't really thought deeply about that. I immediately want to go on the defensive. Like, how do you know that I haven't thought deeply about
Right.
that? You're not me. You don't know what. So just being able to say, I've noticed observation
Mhm.
that when I ask you a question like this, you give me a short answer and it makes me feel like either I insulted you or made you feel bad by asking you that question, or you really didn't, you don't want to think about it or go there. Right. So just something of that nature. I like to think about it as a form of feedback, and that might be helpful.
I find that coaching, being somebody's coach is such a personal thing. Like it's so hard for me sometimes to not take things personally. For example, the classic one coaches always talk about is when your client stops working with you, right? They would rather work with someone else now, or perhaps when they get offended in sessions. I remember when I started being a coach, that was something that made me curl up instantly. Like when
Mm,
they would say, "Oh, that's not how I feel." And we're all taught in coaching school, that's a great thing, right? We want our clients to tell us what's going on. But I inevitably, I think, always take it a little bit personally.
mm.
How do you manage that?
So first of all, Jess, that's never happened to me before. No, I'm just
I
I'm
was like,
kidding.
oh my gosh, next question.
I'm kidding. No, yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a learning curve, right? Because in the beginning, now having done this many hours of coaching many clients, again, I just try to have neutral observations. And it's less about you sound angry right now, right? Because that's an interpretation, more of, hey, I've noticed that there's a shift in your tone. That's it. And have them respond to say, yeah, that last question you had irritated me. Oh,
Yeah,
great. Thank you for sharing that. Tell me more so that I can know, but also let's dig deeper into what's irritating you about that. So, again, it's for me, my ego is now, I still have ego. Everyone has ego, but my ego is now a little bit more removed from it when I just make observations. No one can argue your observations, right? Like I'm observing that you're nodding my head. My
right,
interpretation of that is that you're agreeing with me. That's
right.
it, right?
So good.
Versus, yeah, you seem really excited to be talking to me right now. It's actually that's not the case, right? Whatever. So the neutral observations I've noticed has been a really powerful thing for me as a coach. And still, there'll be ego hits that happen or things that I might where actually something that recently happened to me is I had a prospective client be like, yup, I'm ready to sign. I want to work with you. And then a day later is, oops, something's changed. I'm not going to work with you anymore.
Mm,
And of course, the immediate thought is like, oh, what happened? Or
exactly.
was it me or that kind of stuff? And the reality is that after a while, it's just, you know what? It's okay. Like it's for me, it's just realizing like maybe that wasn't, maybe that's a good thing. Who's to say? Who's to
Yeah.
say?
I like that element. Sometimes we bring in the spiritual element, like the universe. It's not meant to
Yeah,
be
that
or whatnot.
confusion. Yeah, who's
Yeah,
to say what's good or bad?
that
And
too.
that's really
Yes.
helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd love to learn about how you think about your career, like kind of in partnership with your husband, because I, well, don't have one, I'm single, but as a family unit, what are the conversations that you have and how do you think about it?
Yeah, so my husband and I definitely talk a lot about just day-to-day things. Sometimes it can feel really transactional in a partnership in that way, but also we have very much values aligned conversations. What do we as a couple value for us? What do we value individually and holding each other accountable for that? But also what do we value as a family and how are we fulfilling and living those values as a family of four? And so when I think about our careers and managing that, it's still very values based, right? Are we doing work that we find is filling our values? And for me, my value of impact, my value of frankly, like radical love for myself and for my clients. I don't want to work with clients whom I don't love. How are we making sure that we're supporting each other in those things? There are some traditional gendered, so I know that in heterosexual couples, this might be more normative, which I see in our couplehood. So we do share some traditional heteronormative roles where my husband just has a more vigorous work schedule. And unfortunately, the way that childcare in the US in particular and school system works, it's really hard and difficult to not have a in a two-parent household, at least one parent who has more flexibility. A great example is my daughter who just started kindergarten. She gets out of school every day at 12 p.m.
Yeah.
What in the world? In what two parent working parent household if you are one, can you do that? Can you Right. We do have childcare, but still just managing the schedules is really difficult. And so I do take the lead primary role on a lot of those things. But but we're in lockstep so that I don't feel any growing resentment. He doesn't feel any like guilt. We're just making sure that we are in constant conversation. And we do that several ways. Again, it could be a daily transactional thing, like who's doing what and who's right, but also on a weekly basis. Just like how I make sure I do weekly reflections, we make sure we carve out some time away from the kids after they go to bed on a weekly basis to just see like how are we doing, how are we feeling. Doing a check-in as a couple is important.
Do you
Yeah.
ever record this stuff anywhere? You're just talking through it, right?
We have recorded a couple things, especially at one point there was like we came to a head. So it's not all roses and rainbows, right? We came to a head where we're like, okay, let's get a Trello board and see maybe what we're lacking is like transparency into what we're providing for the like for the family, right? Because I know he does a lot. I know I do a lot, but I don't know full visibility of what he's doing. And he
Wow.
doesn't know full visibility of what I'm doing. And it could be the actual transactional things that I'm doing, but it could also be like some of the mental burden. Like being a project manager is a full-time job, right? Having to know what to delegate. So even if a partner is saying, just ask me to do these things, but someone has to think about asking you to do those
Yes.
things. It's those types of conversations. And at one point we're like, okay, and we put on the Trello board, what are the actual things that we're doing, including some of the emotional and mental real estate that's taking up our lives, to
Love
be
it.
able to like see, okay, here's all right. There's some things that we can rebalance out.
Why didn't you continue doing the Trello board?
I think it was a great one-time exercise, unless
Oh,
something
okay.
was deeply changing or whatever. He travels a lot too for his work and traveling to Asia or doing international flights. I think we
Wow.
both recognize that's hard on him. Truly, that's hard on him. That's hard on me, solo parenting while he's gone. So there's these understandings, but just again, I try to put some of the coaching hat. It's hard when it's personal, but trying to put some of the coaching hat on it too, of like neutral curiosity, right? Neutral
So good.
curiosity and observations has been really helpful and life-saving for any kind of
I
relationship.
love this. Oh my gosh, we have 1 minute left. Biggest thing I'm taking away is observation, also because we happen to talk about it more during the latter part of this
Yeah,
conversation, but I really taking that to heart after talking to you.
beautiful. Great, good. I've done my job then.
Yes. Thank you so much for coming.
You're welcome. It's been my pleasure.
So B, why don't you tell us how we can find you?
So the best way that people can find me is a couple of ways. One, go directly to my website, beakim.com, beakim.com. You can find me on Instagram. It's a new Instagram page, so let me know your thoughts. Please feel free to follow Bea Kim Coaching. On LinkedIn, I'm Beatrice Kim. I thought I was a different name, but I'm not. I'm Beatrice Kim. And you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to be connected in any way or medium that works for folks.
Thank you.